Hey there, Jessica here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a licensed therapist based out of Austin, Texas, who specializes in sleep. I love sharing information with people, and I find this topic, the circadian rhythm, particularly interesting. It's really relevant to anybody who sleeps, but especially anybody who has a sleep disorder with a circadian component. So let's go. All right. So your circadian rhythm, and if you've heard of this, this is the thing that it really does a bunch of stuff. But one of the things it does is it determines the timing of when you're awake and when you're asleep. It's a roughly 24-hour rhythm that all humans have. Really, all living things have a circadian rhythm. Other animals look different from humans, but circadian rhythms are one of three types of biological rhythms in humans. So these rhythms are classified by how long it takes to complete one full cycle of the rhythm. So we have, let me move my, I'm going to be moving my face around a lot. So we have ultradian, circadian, and infradian. So ultradian rhythms are any rhythm where it takes less than 24 hours to go a full cycle. So your sleep stages, it varies from person to person, but let's just say like hour and a half to go through like stage one, stage two, stage three, and then a REM cycle. It doesn't always go in that order. But to go through one full cycle, and then you cycle through that several times over the course of the night. Or your appetite, you cycle through hunger and fullness several times over the course of a 24-hour day. So ultradian is less than 24. Infradian, I'm going to skip ahead to number three, that's more than 24. So this is anything where it takes more than 24 hours to go through a full cycle. So good examples of this would be the menstrual cycle or pregnancy. And then we have circadian rhythm. So ultradian is less than 24, infradian is more than 24. Circadian is about 24. So the word circadian comes from the Latin circa, meaning about, and Ds or DAs, DIES, which means day. So it's about a day. And the examples of this would be your sleep-wake cycle. So the full, not the stages of sleep within your sleep cycle, but the full 24 hours of like I'm asleep for a period of time and then I'm awake for a period of time. Also, your circadian rhythm manages stuff like your body temperature and your melatonin production, all of which are also very relevant to what your sleep looks like. So here is an image of what a circadian rhythm can look like in a human. Yours may look a little different depending on how old you are. But if we start at, so this should be, so this is midnight, so it should say 12 a.m. This is noon, and this is midnight. And so you'll notice that you kind of go through this cycle where, so this person is awake, so I don't know, between 6 a.m. and 7:30, somewhere in here. And all these things start to happen. Your blood pressure goes up after you wake up, your melatonin secretion stops. There's some time during the day where you're at your highest alertness. There's also a time during the day where you have what's called a circadian dip. So you have some time every afternoon where you feel a little tired, a little sluggish, and then you come out of it. We all have it. It's called the circadian dip. The timing is going to be different. Generally speaking, it is 7 to 9 hours after you wake up that you're going to have that little dip. There's a particular time of the day where your coordination is good, your reaction time, you're stronger and weaker at different times of the day. Your blood pressure looks different at different times of the day. Your body temperature looks different at times of the day. I want to point out two things. I want to point out this melatonin secretion starts, and then we'll also look at this lowest body temperature. So you have a particular time in the evening. We call it your dim light melatonin onset. And this is where your brain starts to secrete melatonin. And generally speaking, people will fall asleep like a couple of hours, maybe 1 or 2 hours after their melatonin secretion starts. So your melatonin secretion starts, it may not be 9 p.m., yours may be earlier, it may be later. And your melatonin secretion starts, you fall asleep a couple of hours later. We tend to do more of our deep sleep earlier in the night, and we tend to do more of our REM sleep later in the night. REM stands for rapid eye movement. It's actually a pretty light stage of sleep. Sometimes people think REM is deep sleep. They're not the same thing. Deep sleep is deep sleep. That's generally stage three sleep. REM sleep is pretty light sleep. You're pretty easy to wake up when you're in REM sleep, and that is where most of the dreaming happens. The other thing I want to point out is lowest body temperature. So there's a certain time overnight where your body temperature hits its lowest point in a 24-hour period. The average is 4 a.m. Yours could be earlier, could be later. Again, kind of depend. A lot of it's depending on your age, but people tend to wake up. So your body temperature hits that trough, and then it starts to rise again. People will wake up like a couple of hours, give or take, after that body temperature starts to rise, and then the whole thing starts all over again. So, looking at this, I just want to point out like your average teenager goes through this same cycle, just spin it later. And so their melatonin secretion is probably not starting at 9 p.m., it's starting later. Their temperature minimum is probably not 4:30, it's probably later. So if you are a teenager or a young adult, or you have a teenager or a young adult child, and you just maybe you notice that they tend to maybe almost want to keep like vampire hours where they want to stay up late and sleep late. Some of that's biological. Some of that is there, these two pieces that really have an impact on what time you fall asleep and what time you wake up tends to shift later in teenagers. Also, for people that are much farther along in the lifespan, older adults, they shift much earlier. So their melatonin secretion might start earlier. Their temperature minimum is earlier. We'll look at a graph here in a little bit of how the circadian rhythm changes over time. But here's just an idea of what one 24-hour cycle might look like in a typical human adult. There we go. All right. And circadian rhythms really are, let's see, I'll move over here. So they're everywhere. So every known living organism on this planet has a circadian rhythm. And every cell in your body has a circadian rhythm. So you've got a master clock in your brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. We tend to abbreviate that SCN. And here's about where it's located in the brain. This tiny little like teal colored thing right here. So this is like your master clock. This is the thing that takes care of syncing up everything inside of you. So keeping like every cell in your body, trying to keep it all on the same schedule. So that is, we call that internal synchronization. But you also have to worry about external synchronization. So your suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, that's taking care of syncing everything up inside of you. But there's also the concern of how well are you syncing up with the world or your schedule or your environment or what your life demands of you. So we call that external synchronization. So that refers to how well your internal rhythm is matching up with what your life demands. And sometimes it doesn't match up, and this can cause problems. Like, I'll give you a quick example. There's a lot of talk around school start times, particularly for like high schoolers. And a lot of people are saying this should be later because, like what I talked about in the earlier slide, teenagers really truly do not get sleepy until later, and their temperature minimum's later, so they're not going to wake up. Like, there's some real biological stuff going on. They're not just being lazy or trying to be difficult. Like, there really are some biological things going on that is making people who are teens and young adults very difficult to go to bed early and get up early. So, and a particular circadian rhythm isn't bad or disordered. People are like, you can kind of think of like an average adult falls asleep around 11 a.m. and wakes up around 7 a.m. That's kind of what's considered typical. But there's people that skew a little bit earlier. There's people that skew a little bit later, and that's still considered normal. And really, it could skew very early or very late, and it would really still be okay if that person was able to build their life around it. And so there's nothing, I'm going to put a little piece of information in here. It is okay to be a night owl. It is okay to stay up late and sleep late. It's not inherently unhealthy. It's not inherently worse to stay up late and sleep late. If you don't feel sleepy until midnight, it really doesn't do you a lot of good to go to bed at 9. You're not going to fall asleep at 9 if that's not what your body's wanting to do. So it's okay to stay up late and sleep late. It's not inherently bad or unhealthy or immoral or risky. There's kind of all these attitudes out there that it's better to go to bed early and get up early. And so I just want to kind of really emphasize that some people just skew later, and that's really okay if they're able to structure their life around that later sleep time. It can be workable. And then there's also some stuff you can do to try to like shift your rhythm earlier. There are options for that as well that I'll kind of briefly talk about at the end of the video. Okay, so how does your brain know what time it is? Because it doesn't directly know. I mean, I know I said there's like a little clock in your brain, but your brain doesn't directly know. Like for example, I'm recording this. It is 10:13 in the morning in Texas, where I'm located, but my brain doesn't inherently know that it's 10:13. My brain knows that the sun is up and the sun is coming in through the windows, and I've been awake for a couple of hours. I ate breakfast a little while ago. Zeitgebers. And I may not be pronouncing that word right. It's a German word and it translates into time givers. And so our brain relies on lots of external cues that tell it what time it is, that really tell it, is it light? Is it day? What do I need to be doing right now? Do I need to be sleeping? Do I need to be awake? Do I need to be eating? What is it that I need to be doing? So it's an external cue, any external cue that helps to regulate and synchronize what's internal to me, to my schedule and my life and the world around me. So the most impactful Zeitgeber is the light dark cycle. And so light, like this, I'm sitting here, I've got 4 windows in this room. Light is coming in through the windows. It's going directly to my suprachiasmatic nucleus. And it is telling my brain, hey brain, it is daytime. It's daytime. It's time for it's time for the human to be alert and awake and moving around. Light goes directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So we call that process entrainment. So that's the process of syncing up my internal rhythm with the world outside of me. And light entrains your rhythm whether you want it to or not. And so this is where a lot of the concern about like blue light in the evenings has started to come out. There's some validity to that. And there's also, to some extent, I think it's been a little overly vilified. But light is a really impactful time giver. Humans are meant to be, generally speaking, alert during the day and inactive during the night. So another Zeitgeber is melatonin. So melatonin it's something, I mean, a lot of people who have sleep issues have taken melatonin like over the counter. It's also something we have that's naturally occurring. So it's a hormone that is produced by the pineal gland, and it's not this big, but the pineal gland in your brain at night. And light is a stronger Zeitgeber or time giver. Then I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna have some German speaker watch this video, and they're just gonna cringe at my mispronunciation of that word. So light is a stronger time giver than melatonin. Light can suppress melatonin production. Light can override the production of melatonin. So here's that dim light melatonin onset. And so, how this works is at a particular time in the evening, typically like as soon as it's getting dark outside, your brain will start to produce melatonin. And that boosted production of melatonin communicates to your SCN, that master clock, that dark is coming soon and sleep time is coming soon. And typically, you will fall asleep approximately 2 hours after your dim light melatonin onset. So really, like I hear a lot of people that come to see me for sleep issues will express a lot of concerns about like the screens, the phones, the iPads, the stuff like that. And I've had people ask me that question about are the phones screwing up our sleep? I think our sleep already got screwed up with the advent of artificial light. So way before we had just when we started being able to have lights on when it was dark outside. Um, I think stuff really started to change. So this is not this isn't a new problem. But I'm also going to say that for a typical person, like a little bit of light in the evening is probably not going to have the impact that we think it will. So most of us have exposure to light all day. And blue light is not inherently bad. I mean, sunlight is blue light. Blue light also helps you. It entrains your circadian rhythm. It kind of gets you good. It's good to have light in the morning. It gets you going. So blue light, you don't want to remove like all blue light from your life. But there are people, particularly people with like circadian rhythm issues, we do get a little bit stricter about the light exposure. But it also just doesn't have as big of an impact on like shifting you one way or the other as people think it does. I'll go ahead and say I work a lot with insomnia, and in my experience, the two biggest culprits in insomnia are people spend way too much time in bed and they try way too hard to sleep. That's what we work on. It's not really the phone. It's not really the TV. It's not really that. It's the fact that people are spending way too much time in bed and they're trying way too hard to sleep. And those are really the two things that we work on within some other stuff, but those are the two primary things. All right, so that's melatonin. Just a little bit more about melatonin. So, a lot of people use melatonin as a hypnotic. So, a hypnotic is a class of medications that helps you fall asleep. So, like Ambien's a hypnotic, Lunesta is a hypnotic. There's a few other drugs that fall into that classification. So, a lot of people use it as a sleeping pill, and they take it with the intention of like knocking themselves out. And that's not what melatonin is. It's technically a chronobiotic if we want to get like real technical with the name. So melatonin can be, there is a place for it, but it's not typically used to make people go to sleep. It can be used to either regulate or shift the circadian rhythm. So if somebody has a circadian rhythm disorder, which this is something that you would need to go see a sleep specialist to have this diagnosed. They'd probably have you keep like a couple of weeks of sleep log data, do an assessment, roll things in or out. But they are treatable. They're usually treated with some combination of like properly timed light exposure and maybe some properly timed melatonin. But it's generally not that helpful for like making you fall, like inducing sleep. So a lot of people will try melatonin. Some people will say that it works, and I mean, and that's totally fine. But if you've tried it for your insomnia and it hasn't worked, this is probably why. Okay. So I thought this was really interesting. I'm going to move myself over here. So this is the circadian rhythm and how it shifts over the lifespan. So a newborn, a baby, basically has no circadian rhythm. So the purple blocks are when they're sleeping, and then the lightish blocks are awake. I mean, and this is just kind of arbitrary. I just kind of put these blocks like just arbitrarily, tried to make them evenly spaced so it would look nice, but um, so it's so funny when people talk about sleeping like a baby, that kind of cracks me up because babies don't sleep all that well. And if you're a new parent or if you've had a baby in your house at some point, you know this that if you have a baby, you are probably also not sleeping. They don't have a circadian rhythm. It's just they're asleep, they're awake, they're asleep, they're awake, they're asleep like a lot of the day, and there's no predictability to it by the first year of life. Oh, and just this is 6 p.m. This is midnight, 6 a.m., noon, and then actually ignore this. I think I should have taken that off because if it's 6:12, then this should be 6 a.m. So apologies for that error. So by the first year of life, the sleep is starting to consolidate into like what most people's sleep looks like, a longish block at night. But a 1-year-old is still going to take one or two naps during the day. A 4-year-old All right, now it's consolidating further. Now their sleep at overnight is getting longer. They still fall asleep pretty early, and a 4 year old's probably still going to need a nap in the afternoon. And then by the time we get to 10, now they're sleeping in one long block. They're probably not taking naps anymore, but it is a long block. 10-year-olds are long sleepers. Kids need a lot of sleep. We think it's because their brains are still developing. And because it tends to be that like you need the most sleep when you're a baby, and older adults tend to get sort of the least amount of sleep. So when your brain is rapidly developing, there's other theories too, but that's one of them, is that kids need a lot of sleep because their brains are still developing, and that sleep is really critical to brain development. So 10-year-olds, long sleepers. Young teens. I think if when people say I want to sleep like a baby, I feel like it would be more accurate to say I want to sleep like a young teen because they fall asleep at more or less like societally normal times. And the quantity of their sleep is, it's not this long block like the 10-year-old. It's a shorter block, and it's closer to more, again, what we would call societally normal times. I think young teens are probably doing the best. Older teens, all right, here we go. Notice how much later this shifts. Like it's not uncommon for an older teen to not go to bed before, or not want to go to bed before midnight, and so want to sleep till noon. There's a lot of stuff biologically going on. And I want to kind of make the distinction between what's normal and what's a disorder, because there is a disorder called phase delayed circadian disorder. And you might think, oh my gosh, all teens have that. Well, really, the way that I make that distinction is older teens are that are like normal delayed are they're going to be able to muddle through it. They don't like it. They're not morning people. They don't want to go to bed. They're going to be hard to get up, but they can muddle through it. They can make it to school. They can make it through school. They can muddle through college. And then as they age out of adolescence, their sleep will start to shift a little earlier. People with a circadian rhythm disorder, on the other hand, are going to be typically people who have to drop out of school because they just couldn't make it to class and they weren't making their grades, or they're going to lose jobs because they just couldn't get to work on time. So that's kind of the difference with a disorder, is the person has typically had like major impact to their life, and their life is kind of on hold because their circadian rhythm is so far outside the norm that they can't get to class, they can't get to work, and they end up having to drop out of school and they lose their job, and then they're just kind of stuck. So there are treatments available for those people. I will briefly touch on them. But yeah, that's kind of the difference between what's normal and what's a disorder. Once you get into young adulthood, you shift a little bit earlier, and then middle age, you shift earlier still, and then old adult. So, older adults are like much, much earlier. Now, the fact this block is long, don't put any like the. I should not have made this block as long as it is, because older adults don't tend to be very long sleepers. They kind of sleep probably the least amount out of any age group. It also tends to be very fragmented. Your sleep kind of gets a little worse as you age. That said, I still would say if it's really disrupting your life, it might still be worth speaking to a doctor, finding a sleep specialist. Like, I don't want it to be like, oh, well, you're old and your sleep is just bad, because that's not 100% true, but it will shift over your lifespan. And I mean, when you're an old adult, you're not going to sleep like you did when you were a kid or an older teen. Or you're just not, like, it's just not going to look the same. Okay. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about some different, just give like really brief information about circadian rhythm disorders. So this is kind of just for general information. I'm hoping that if somebody sees this and they think it sounds like them, um, in fact, I think I can even put a thing down in the description. There's a couple of directories that have people across the country who specialize in sleep issues. So either a sleep medicine doctor, or there are therapists like myself who specialize in sleep. They can help you kind of tease out Is it one of these? Because you collect a lot of data. There's just there's an assessment process. So would I say that this, obviously you're not going to watch this and like self-diagnose and can go from there. I recommend that you see somebody who specializes because you have to get it just right, like in terms of like the light and the melatonin. You got to get it just right, or you're not going to get any benefit, or it could actually make stuff worse. But these are some circadian rhythm disorders. We have delayed sleep wake phase disorder and advanced sleep wake phase disorder. And then there's also something called non 24-hour sleep wake rhythm disorder and irregular sleep wake rhythm disorder. I'm going to define each of these as we go. And then shift work disorder. So this is when if somebody is having to work a shift that doesn't fit what their circadian rhythm is. Jet lag disorder used to be in the diagnostic manual that all these are in. They've taken it out of the most recent one because jet lag is kind of just considered to be a fact of modern life, and it's just something that we kind of all have to tolerate, given that we are humans who live in the jet age. It's kind of interesting if you think about, generally speaking, you can only shift your circadian rhythm about an hour a day. And so when you fly somewhere, particularly if you fly like from the US to Europe, flying east is really difficult because you lose a bunch of time. It's going to take about a day for every hour that you traveled across for your circadian rhythm to catch up. And that interim period where you're catching up, that's what we call jet lag. And it's interesting. I was thinking about, so I went to Europe last year and it was the farthest like east I'd ever flown. And I was thinking about how recent and how kind of like, I don't think humans were really designed to be able to travel that quickly. Because if you think about what do we have before planes, people would take a boat and it would take a much longer to get to Europe, but they didn't have jet lag because you probably just had enough time for your circadian rhythm to adjust. And now we're all dealing with jet lag. So it's no longer considered a disorder, it's just considered a fact of modern life. But there are the American Academy of Sleep Medicine does have guidelines for shifting your rhythm in preparation for a trip. There are set guidelines. I think if you just Google American Academy of Sleep Medicine jet lag guidelines, you could probably find something. But it's basically like properly timed light and melatonin, maybe some naps. I don't remember exactly. It's honestly a big headache. Most people look at it and they decide, never mind, I'm just going to tolerate the jet lag. But there is stuff you can do, again, with light and melatonin to try to ease that jet lag. All right. So I just have this little diagram that just shows, let's see, I'm going to move me here. So this is sleep phases by disorder. So let's just say this is a normal sleep phase. This person's sleeping, I don't know, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. There's some variation there, but that's normal. Somebody with delayed, it's pretty much the same. They're going to go through the same cycle that this person does in the same length of time. It's just pushed way later. So if somebody has delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, if they could just sleep on the schedule, if they could go to bed at like 3 in the morning and sleep till noon, and that's their schedule and that's allowed, they actually sleep really well. The sleep problem goes away. They feel rested, they sleep through the night, they fall asleep quickly, everything's great. The problem is that most school schedules and most work schedules, unless you get like a second shift job, and some people do that, they will just get work like a later shift, and some people do that and it works great. But most school schedules and work schedules are going to want you at work before noon, which means you're going to need to go to sleep before 4 a.m. or you're not going to get enough sleep. Advanced. So I honestly don't see a lot of this in my practice. It's pretty rare to see this type of pattern in a non-elderly person. Um, and typically with advanced, if somebody's rhythm looks like this, you kind of just build the schedule around that. You don't really do a whole lot to try to shift them earlier. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has some guidance around light and melatonin for delayed people. But for advanced people, the recommendations just aren't as strong. And so the main recommendation is just to try to structure your life around it. And then there's something called irregular. I haven't seen it in my just kind of regular private practice. You tend to see this more in like elderly people in nursing, like people living in institutions, elderly people in nursing homes, and this is where they just sleep. They almost sleep like a newborn in a way. It's just like little blocks, and then they're awake, and then they're asleep, and then they're awake. And if you add up all their sleep over a 24-hour period, it will add up to about 8 hours. It's a reasonable amount. It's just broken up in little. Um, and then this is the non 24-hour sleep wake rhythm disorder. So this is where it advances by an hour. So every day you go to bed an hour later and you get up an hour later. And then the next day, hour later, and it kind of runs around the clock. So I want to break down. Here's delayed sleep wake phase disorder. So somebody with delayed sleep wake phase disorder. Oop, well, I don't know if I could. Okay, just kidding. That paperclip thing is in the way. Um, so they're typically going to fall asleep, again, like left to their own devices. If they are allowed to just sleep naturally, they are going to fall asleep most easily between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. If they go to bed at 9, it's going to take them 4 hours to fall asleep. If they go to bed at 2, they're going to be asleep pretty quickly. Maybe. I mean, or it may need to be later. So they're going to wake up sometime between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. So this is what their cycle looks like. Fall asleep between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m., wake up between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. These people are going to get more alert as the day goes on. They're super sluggish in the morning. They're very sleepy in the morning and they get more alert. They kind of come alive as it gets later and later. So if they have to keep conventional bed and wake times, that's going to mean they are not getting enough sleep at night because they literally cannot fall asleep probably before 1 a.m., like 1 a.m. at the earliest. And then they probably have to get up at 6 to be ready for school or work. And so they're going to have insufficient sleep, which then leads to what we call excessive daytime sleepiness. They're falling asleep at their desk. They're falling asleep in the car on the way to school. They're falling asleep when they don't want to be falling asleep. So in a teen, you might notice just a lot of irritability, which I know that may just sound like kind of standard for teenagers. And then struggle in school. There's going to be a lot of struggle in school. They're going to be falling asleep at their desk, stuff like that. And then in an adult, there might be job performance issues, which of course, if you have issues with your job, that's going to lead to financial issues. That could also lead to marital discord. It's kind of how it shows up for adults. Now, the problem is this can look a lot like insomnia. And because somebody could come to me and say, I think I have insomnia, I cannot fall asleep to save my life. That could be insomnia. Or it could be a phase delay. You could have both. And so these delayed people, their dim light melatonin onset is usually after 10. So if that's at 10, you're probably going to fall asleep at midnight. If it's at 11, you're probably going to fall asleep at 1. I mean, there's some variation in there. So you really want to see somebody who specializes in sleep that can help tease this out because the treatment for insomnia and the treatment for phase delayed circadian rhythm are different. There's some overlap, but there's some differences as well. So really, how do you know the difference is with a delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, their sleep problem disappears. If they could just sleep, the problem is the schedule. If they could just sleep on their preferred schedule, they sleep well. If they can go to bed at 3 and sleep till noon, they sleep great. They're happy, they have energy, their sleep looks really good. It's when they're trying to shove it into this time that just does not work for them. All right, let's talk about advanced. So I don't see a lot of this in my practice. I'll go ahead and talk about it. So, people with this, now they are going to fall asleep quite early, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., and then they're going to wake up easily between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. So, these people are going to feel very sleepy. In the afternoon and the early evening, they're going to be at their sleepiest, and they're going to be quite alert early in the morning. So, their struggle is going to be more related to social life. If you can wake up at 5 a.m. easily and have energy, then you're not going to have a problem like getting to work on time. There just really tends to be less stigma associated with, I don't know if it's that it's just less common or if it's that there's less fallout if you're an early person because we live in a society I think that really values like early to bed, early to rise is kind of this thing in our culture. And so we don't tend to see it as much of a problem if someone goes to bed early and gets up early. So if they have any sort of fallout, it's more related to social life. It's more related to, I fall asleep at 7 p.m. It's hard to go to dinner with friends or stuff like that. But, this can also look, I mean, insomnia can be this. Insomnia can be, I wake up. So sometimes insomnia is I can't fall asleep. But insomnia can also be I can't stay asleep. I have people that fall asleep fairly easily, but they either wake up a lot during the night or they just wake up really early and they just cannot get back to sleep. And so, again, really working with somebody who specializes in sleep issues can help tease out the difference because the treatments are a little bit different. So, I thought this thing was really interesting. So, we've got these three lines, and this solid line is like a quote unquote normal or average adult. So this is 12 noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., and so on. So you see the line goes up and then here's a dip. This is the circadian dip. We all have one. This person's is like 2 or 3, like 2 to 4 in the afternoon. Then they come out of the dip. These dots, this is called your wake maintenance zone. So this is a period where you are like physiologically incapable of falling asleep. So for this normal adult, their wake maintenance zone is like 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then 9 p.m., they come out of the wake maintenance zone. Now we're getting into the time where they could maybe realistically fall asleep. They fall asleep somewhere here, and then here's their temperature minimum. It's about 4 in the morning, maybe 4:30. Once that hits, the temperature starts to rise. And oh, look, we're in another wake maintenance zone. So now it's 7 a.m. and kind of onward to noon, where they're going to be less inclined to want to fall back asleep. This one with like the small boxes, this is a delayed person. So you notice it's the exact same pattern, just pushed later. So da 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 da. Oh, here's their circadian dip, but notice that it is later in the day. So the normal person is coming out of their circadian dip into their wake maintenance zone. The delayed person, they're delayed. They're just now getting to their circadian dip. So their circadian dip is like we're pushing it close to dinner time. It's early dinner time, but still. And then they come out of the circadian dip, they're in their wake maintenance zone. They cannot fall asleep. But look how long it lasts. We're going till midnight. So if this person goes to bed at 9 or 10, they're not falling asleep. They're not naturally. They're not falling asleep. Maybe if they, I don't know, drank a bunch of alcohol or something like that, they could kind of crash, but they are not naturally falling asleep. They don't come out of their wake maintenance until after midnight. So now it's past midnight. Okay, now maybe they could realistically fall asleep. And then we got the same pattern. Here's their temperature minimum. This is like 7 in the morning. So if this person had to get up at 7 in the morning, it would be the equivalent of asking this person to get up at 4 in the morning. They would not be very alert. 7 in the morning, then they start to come out of it. So this is the time when maybe they're expected to wake up or go to work or go to school, but they don't hit that wake maintenance zone until 10 o'clock. Now they're starting to wake up. They're dragging and groggy in this time right here, in the time where we're like, get out of bed, go to school, go to work. It's not happening. And then the longer dash, excuse me, longer dash lines. This is a advanced person. So again, same thing. They've already hit their circadian dip like a little bit after noon. And then here's their wake maintenance zone way early. We're talking 3 p.m., 19, which is 7 p.m. Now so 7 p.m., they're dropping out of their wake maintenance zone. So this is when they're going to start feeling sleepy. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., and then EMA means early morning awakening. So these people are going to have early morning awakenings. They hit their temperature minimum at like 2 a.m. and then they start to come out of it. So they start waking up, I don't know, between 4 and 5, just naturally. And then they're in their wake maintenance zone from like 5 a.m. onward. SOI is sleep onset insomnia, because the delayed people are going to complain of sleep onset insomnia. So it's the same cycle, it's just pushed earlier or later, depending on what's going on. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about shift work disorder. So this happens if you are expected to work a non-traditional shift and your circadian rhythm isn't naturally aligned with that shift. Maybe you have a typical circadian rhythm, but you're being asked to work night shift. Or really the worst scenario is when it flips back and forth, like night to day to night to day. If you could be on a night shift and that's just your schedule, that's workable. You just make that your schedule. You can entrain your circadian rhythm to sleep and wake on that schedule. The other problem is that people who work night shifts will want to keep a day scheduled over the weekend, which is understandable. They want to spend time with their families. They want to spend time with their friends. They want to be a part of the world. And your circadian rhythm hates that. So it's kind of a dilemma. Um, but what's going on with shift work is you have basically, you're awake when you need to be asleep and you're asleep when you need to be awake. So you have what we call the high circadian alerting signal. So you're in your like wake maintenance zone during the day when you're supposed to be sleeping because you work at night. And then when you're supposed to be awake at night, you have excessive sleepiness. So that's just a little, I mean, that's shift work disorder, pretty self-explanatory. Irregular. So this is where you have three or more sleep episodes in a 24-hour period, but the sleep is a reasonable amount if you add it all up. I don't see a ton of this. It kind of shows up in people that are in any kind of an institution might start to show this sleep pattern. You see it in people with dementia, and then kids who have either cognitive impairment or some kind of a neurodevelopmental disorder, they might sleep on this kind of a pattern. And then the last one is non-24 hour, which I just find this one really interesting. I haven't seen it in my practice, but this is where your sleep wake period just delays by an hour or two every day. And this is also referred to as free running disorder because it free runs around the clock. So every night, this person will fall asleep an hour later than they did the previous night and wake up an hour later. Typically, you're going to see this either in people who are blind or people who have some kind of head trauma. And what's going on is that their brains are not responding to light the way that a sighted person would, or the way that somebody without the type of head trauma would. All of us would actually do this if we were deprived of light. So if a human was put in a cave for a period of time with absolutely no light exposure, light is what keeps our circadian rhythm basically from doing this. It's what keeps it regular. It's what keeps it on the same time every day. So if you were in a cave or completely deprived of light, your circadian rhythm would start to do the same thing. You would start to go to bed and wake up an hour later every day. And then I'll just briefly touch on, I didn't want to get a lot into the treatments for these disorders because that's something that you'll need to really work with somebody who specializes in sleep. But all these disorders have treatment protocols. Some are more treatable than others, I would say. Some of them are more changeable. Others are you kind of just have to figure out a way to live with it. But it's usually some combination of setting a regular bedtime and a regular wake time, figuring out when to time the light exposure, and maybe figuring out when to give the person some melatonin. So I think that's all my slides. That is all my slides. Okay. If you've made it all the way through, thank you so much for sticking with me. I find this stuff really interesting. Hopefully you do too, but certainly not everybody does. So I'll kind of leave with this. If you are located in the state of Texas, I am a licensed therapist in the state of Texas. I work virtually, so I can see anybody in the state of Texas. And you think you might have one of these things going on, or just you're dealing with sleep issues, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is it the show notes? That's a podcast thing. The description. I think that's what it is on YouTube. I'll also pop in. There's some directories. If you're not located in the state of Texas, just due to the way licensure laws work, I can't see anyone who is not physically located in the state of Texas. But there are people all over the country who specializes in sleep issues, have the same training I do, have the same knowledge I do. And so I'm going to also pop in. There's a couple of directories that you can search. So anyway, I think that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.